Welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings. During the last couple of months, I've really taken an interest in interviewing a new group of UFO researchers, and I might even say activists. I think it's fair to see many of these people as the next generation of UFO research, especially as it concerns the U.S. and Britain, primarily, I guess we could say, English-speaking ufology. The longtime UFO researcher Grant Cameron came up with his own nickname for them, which, as far as I can tell, seems to be sticking, and that's the Young Guns. Actually, many of these folks have been in UFO research for a pretty long time, so it's not like they have no background. But they do have energy, they do have passion, they are smart, and they seem to know that they're kind of synergistic and that they really do support each other's efforts. It's a loose group, but I think that there's something into seeing them as a movement of sorts. One of these gentlemen is Jay from Project Unity. Jay operates primarily via his YouTube channel called Project Unity. And he has been doing some really important work of late in the UFO field. And in particular, and we're going to get into this, he did an absolutely amazing interview with Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal of the New York Times relating to their recent journalism on the matter of UFOs. And I thought it was an incredible interview, frankly, and Jay was superb. So, but there's a lot more that Jay has got going on, and I would really like to get into that with him. So, Jay, welcome to the program. Happy to have you here.
Thanks, Richard. I just want to say that, since I first started researching this topic, your channel and all the informative guests you bring on have remained pretty much, a continuous source of information for me. And so being here is a big deal. It's been a pretty short time span since I've gone from being a listener to a guest. And so I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, Jay, it is my pleasure, honestly, to have you. And particularly after hearing your interview with Leslie and Ralph, I thought this individual really has got it together. I thought that your interview just showed a tremendous amount of maturity and insight, but we'll get into all of that. First thing I'd like to ask you is what is it that got you into the UFO subject to begin with? How long have you been doing the UFO subject? I guess, I don't know if I want to say professionally, at least in the public realm. How long have you been doing this? And what is it that got you here?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words in regards to the interview. I was, pretty nervous about it, but based on the responses from the community so far, from the people that have seen it, I seem to have done a good job. So I'm really happy with that.
Yeah.
In regards to, when I started up Project Unity, I mean, it started a little over a year ago, really, in terms of the channel, but it really kicked off into gear within the last 5 months. I started it because I have had, and indeed continue to have, successful, albeit relatively rudimentary, contact with some aspects of the phenomenon. This is not something I have direct evidence for, but these things happened to me. They changed my life. And from these contacts came the subsequent drive to create a platform wherein I could present my research and my experiences with the hopes of, basically cultivating a network of like-minded people. Now, for some people, the idea of contact via some form of kind of consciousness assisted modality is totally absurd, and I sympathize with that point of view. And maybe at some point during this discussion, I can expand on my views around consciousness and contact with the phenomena, as I do have some thoughts on this. But essentially, Project Unity started due to my own personal experiences with the phenomena. I was not interested in the UFO subject until about 3 years ago, but coincidentally, for a couple of years leading up to me entering the research field on this topic, I'd started to do my own research into different ideas surrounding consciousness, as well as beginning to verse myself on certain aspects of quantum mechanics that seem to echo, albeit through a more scientific paradigm, the same concepts that I was absorbing through more esoteric teachings. And these prior research endeavors allowed me to approach the UFO topic with quite an open mind. And I kind of consider myself someone who takes like a symbiotic approach to the UFO subject regarding nuts and bolts and the consciousness aspect of the whole thing. And so I chose the name Project Unity because I personally believe there is a currently neglected but absolutely necessary coupling between what we could call science and spirituality, or physics and metaphysics, and these are two sides of a whole, in my opinion, and they must operate in a symbiotic nature. And it's my opinion that the current quite apparent disequilibrium between these two aspects of reality, the kind of cosmic imbalance that we adhere to, is in some ways likely responsible for the great imbalance we see echoed through society on a geosocial scale. So Project Unity really is me exploring these ideas, learning and presenting what I find to a network of individuals.
Well, that's fascinating. And I'm really glad that you expanded on that. The CE5 interest of yours is definitely something I wanted to talk with you about.
Right.
And maybe we can just jump into that now, actually, and then come into the whole breakdown of the New York Times element, since you've really
Yeah,
done a nice.
absolutely.
I mean, when people think of CE5s, obviously it was really made famous by Dr. Stephen Greer. And, Greer is still quite active. He's been the most active promoter of CE5 initiatives probably in the world over the last 25 years, I guess. But it's helpful to remind others that there's a lot more to CE5 than Stephen Greer. I mean, Greer, he's interesting to me. He's always been, but he's also been very polarizing in terms of how people respond to him. And, there's nothing wrong with saying that. I think it's just pretty obvious. There are people who are very, very strongly devoted to him and others who really oppose him in one way or another. But not always because of the concept of CE5. Like, to me, that's the one thing that I have learned over the years. And I want to give a shout out while we're doing this to another of the young guns. I say it Grant's way, young guns. And that's James Ian Dolan, who's over at Engaging the Phenomenon on YouTube. And I've communicated with James for many years too. And he like you, I think, has a very, I think, well thought out view of this phenomenon. And like you, it's based on your his personal experience and your personal experience. So is that something that you can expand on a little bit, like your personal CE5? Like, what is it that prompted you to say, wow, this is absolutely right on? Like, I meditated, I focused, I did whatever I did, and I had contact. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Richard. Also, just a shout out to James Ian Dolan from Engaging the Phenomena. Fantastic channel, fantastic guy, and one of the young gun researchers that I've interacted with the most. And I think he was actually one of the first people kind of classified as a young gun that I first started interacting with. And people might know that I contribute quite frequently to his Ask UFO Twitter series that he does on YouTube, which is a really great series covering all sorts of different topics with different UFO researchers, from different countries all across the world, giving their opinion. It's really worthwhile, for people who haven't seen it yet. So check out Engaging the Phenomenon. But in regards to CE5, so if I can ramble on a bit, one thing that I think, one thing that I think is important to mention, just before we kind of go directly into talking about my opinions on consciousness-assisted contact, or what has been popularized, as you said, by Greer as CE5. And no disrespect to Greer whatsoever, because I do support Greer in a lot of his endeavors. But he didn't create CE5. He just created a term for it and popularized something that I believe is a bit more natural and a bit more innate to humanity. So something that I think is really important for people to remember, and actually it was summarized quite well in my opinion by Eric Davis and Jacques Vallée in a paper they did. It was titled Incommensurability, Orthodoxy, and the Physics of High Strangeness, a 6-layer model for anomalous phenomena. So a really interesting title, wherein they talk about the issue that the rational study of reported cases of unidentified aerial phenomena, is at somewhat of an impasse. And this is much to do with the incomplete state of our models of physical reality, as it has to do with the complexity of the data. So I think that, what people should take away from that is that we don't know everything. Our model of physics, our models of reality, they do not explain everything. And what we seem to be dealing with in some form regarding the phenomena is, at least in my opinion, some form of global disruptor, a conscious disruptor of the entrenched status quo. Because these things, they take our so solid physics and our socially integrated ideologies and perspectives, and they completely subvert them, completely dismantle the framework of the current paradigm. And that in of itself, without any need for further communication, that alone lights people's heads up, makes them ask questions. So it's important for people to remember that we're dealing with physics here. We're just dealing with a type of physics we're not fully accustomed to, at least not in the Western cultures. There are areas of Peru, deep in the Amazon basin, as well as Native American folks and other such cultures that are more shamanic in nature and have not disregarded the esoteric wisdoms, that we've disregarded as much in the West. And these cultures understand to some degree the metaphysics of reality quite well. And yet apparently, the polluters, the warmongers, corporate elites are representative of the most advanced culture on the planet. I find this to be a very curious mindset to have in regards to big picture outcomes on a geosocial scale.
I liked your phrase, global disruptor. That was actually quite quite provocative, and combined with the idea that we're dealing with a new and not fully understood physics.
Right.
So, are you suggesting that this global disruptor is an intelligence of its own of some sort? I mean, I'm getting the idea from you that that's what you see it as. It's not necessarily an extraterrestrial intelligence, right? It's just an intelligence that we're tapping into. How do you see that?
Well, maybe some element of it. I mean, I think it's a really wide phenomenon. I do see like an overarching, or even a substrate of consciousness maybe being what gives rise to the physical universe. But so I guess in like an overarching scheme, everything is, in my opinion, this consciousness being represented in many different forms. But within that, we've got humans, and we've got more than likely physical ETs. I think with consciousness assisted contact and what you're contacting through CE5, I think it may be of a different thread, more within the thread of what Jacques Vallée describes within a metaphysical component. So I'm not saying that everything is that type of phenomena, that global disruptor, but there seems to be, at least to my belief, a level where that is present. There is some form of disrupting energy or disrupting beings or force, whatever you want to say. But the key, one of the key areas I think that strengthens the likelihood of these types of modalities in regards to CE5 being actionable and repeatable and yield results. One of the areas of interest, is a suggestion given to us by countless reports all over the world from people who have had some form of consciousness-related interaction with a UFO or occupants or some level of the phenomena. This interaction can take the form of what we call downloads of information. It can be visuals in their head or, around the contactee. It can be direct telepathy, wherein the contactee can hear the being clearly in their head. We have military reports of such instances occurring, such as the UK's Rendlesham Forest incident, just to name one.
Right.
We also have many, many claims. I say claims only because this has not been fully substantiated per se. However, I feel the data available to us already provides a strong argument for consciousness being essentially an integrated part of a UFO's operational systems, or at least some UFOs, and that in some way the craft and the occupant or pilot are actually interfacing and interacting through consciousness. And there are those that say the point-to-point instantaneous travel exhibited by these craft is possible, essentially, it's possible essentially due to there being a singularity. What I'm trying to say is, if this is accurate, if they are traveling instantaneously, and if consciousness at the fundamental level is a singularity and therefore omnipresent or non-local, right, entangled with all matter. Yeah. So then, the instantaneous travel is explained because they're traveling at the speed of potentially thought, the speed of consciousness, which is instantaneous, because consciousness is everywhere at once. I would wager that some, if not all, of these visitors are utilizing forms of consciousness-assisted technologies, and this would explain the undeniable ESP telepathic aspect of the phenomena. So that that's one point to make when it comes to C5. I've got a bit more if I can ramble on, but I don't want to keep going.
I would just like to add on and actually really agree with you here. I've been dragged into the recognition of consciousness as something very critical to the UFO phenomenon, but I'm not being dragged anymore. I'm completely on board with this idea. And for the last decade or so, I have been trying in my own little journey to understand the relationship of consciousness to the UFO phenomenon. It is absolutely undeniable that there's a connection there.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it wasn't Stephen Greer who invented CE5. I mean, he gave it the title, and it's really true. There's just one of so many UFO encounters that one can connect to consciousness. But one that I think of is one of my favorite old cases from 1927. Himalayan explorers led by an artist philosopher named Nicholas Roerich and his wife were out among an early party of people exploring the vastness of the Himalayas. This is many years before Mount Everest was climbed by Sir Edmund Hillary. But they were out there and they had a UFO sighting. And Roerich wrote about this in a book called Altai Himalaya. And it's a remarkable sighting. And the thing about it, though, that made me bring it up in this context is that Roerich and his wife were both deeply spiritual people.
Right.
In fact, his wife was one of the early translators of the writings of Helena Blavatsky, the Theosophists, and they both were Theosophists themselves. And when I learned that, I thought, wow, is that just is that just an accident or is it not an accident? Like many, many, many years ago, I think over 20 years ago, I had a UFO sighting when my son was 3 years old. I was holding his hand in front of our house, looking up, perfect blue sky, and I saw an intensely bright object. And for whatever reason, I thought that this object I could not look away from it. I had to look at it. My son, though, was demanding my attention. I'll never forget this. And I thought, well, I have to look at him to talk with him because he was needing me to talk to him. And I actually pointed at the sky to hold the place of that object. Well, I looked at him for 1 second and I said, hang on, I'm looking at something. And I turned back up and that thing was gone. And it just blew my mind. And I've never gotten out of my mind that there was a consciousness connection. I can't prove it. And this is the other problem with consciousness as a fundamental substrate or a fundamental element of the UFO phenomenon. It's like, how do we
esoteric by nature?
You've got all of this witness testimony and it's just overwhelming. And those two examples, my personal one and the 1927, those are just two of countless examples. But I'm with you in that, like, even if I can't fully measure this accurately the way some scientists would want, like, I just have to recognize what common sense is telling me, that there's a definite connection there. And I'm glad you referenced the work of Eric Davis because we're going to be coming back to him, I'm sure, in this conversation. So any other things that you want to get into with consciousness? You called it rambling, but actually you're being really on point here. I'm interested in anything else you want to say about this.
Well, just because I know it's a very divided subject, and the thing is, I'd never pretend to be a scientist. I'm only going from my own perspective of intuitive learning, of some degree of experience, because I've had some amazing experiences that are, unquestionably, unless I'm completely insane, they are unquestionably unearthly contacts or things that we've never seen before. So for me, it's hard because I've seen these things and they've been repeated, and they've been repeated when I've been trying to initiate a form of contact. So I know that this is real, and so it's hard sometimes when you come from that position. And I understand, because I'm not trying to come on very strong, but we have all this data, things like remote viewing. I think it's fair to say we have proven, even if it has not reached modern academia fully, we have indeed proven through various studies that consciousness can interact outside of the body in a non-local format, and that an information exchange, an information exchange between quantum data occurs, irrespective of time and space. This is how an American remote viewer in a CIA skiff could detail the specifics of a Russian ICBM station and have their claims, corroborated by satellite imagery after the fact.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. How is this possible? What does that say about physics, space and time and causality even?
This is proof of coherent quantum entanglement, in my opinion, wherein information can be exchanged across huge distances. And, it's the exact same phenomena, funnily enough, that takes place in your body. It's kind of it's interesting, but work with me on this. We call it spooky action at a distance in terms of how that's what Einstein called it, in how quantum particles can interact irrespective of distance and time and be in two places at once. The entanglement section is spooky action at a distance, and this is literally happening to some respect inside of you. You are made of mostly empty space, just like the universe, and yet information can pass between the huge, relatively speaking, spaces inside your body, atoms, protons, neutrons. These things basically communicate across cosmic distances. The only difference is we observe those distances with a microscope, not a telescope. But the result is the same, in my opinion. We just, like the universe, are mostly empty space. And the way we communicate with all the cells in our body is reflected in our ability to communicate with all points in space and time within the universe, microcosm to macrocosm, as above, so below. So, when we zoom out of our bodies in a universe, we can see how it is all stored inside of our human body. So, perhaps if we could zoom out of the universe and the universe of universes, we could see the body of what we call God.
Wow, that's a beautiful thought. It's obvious you've really given this a lot of deep thought and spent a lot of time with it. And I really enjoyed hearing this. May I ask you, in your own CE5 endeavors, are you able to share any kind of communications that you have received, or some of the more interesting encounters that you have had when you have engaged? And how often do you attempt to do CE5 as well? But what have you gotten out of it? What have you learned?
Okay, so recently I've lapsed, and I'm not happy with myself with that. It's a matter of discipline. daily meditation, just like getting up and going for a jog in the morning. It's a mental exercise, just like a physical exercise. You need to strengthen it. And so I'm not always as disciplined as I should be, but can you just repeat the question again?
Oh yeah, no problem. I'm just wondering, well, how often do you do it? And
right. Sorry, yeah.
Then
in
what
terms
have
of contacts as well.
What kinds of have you gotten any communications that really stand out with you? So how can you describe those?
Yeah. So, when I first started doing this, funnily enough, I got introduced to it through Unacknowledged. And Unacknowledged was the first documentary. I'd seen other UFO documentaries back in the day, but at that point, I wasn't really thinking very coherently about my life introspectively. I was a younger lad. So that was, further back in time. But I got introduced to Unacknowledged by my best friend. And when they got into the CE5 aspects of it, I'd already been looking into remote viewing and some of the consciousness aspects. So it was actually quite an easy template to bring over to my ideologies, my pre-existing ideologies on consciousness. I just never thought about the fact that you could maybe reach out and make, some form of communication. So once I learned, I just went out in my garden, and pretty much every contact, 99% of the things I've seen have happened in my back garden, which I can literally see from my window right now. And 4 experiences have occurred to me which have been the most profound. I've seen a lot of weird things. Not everything I can completely say is extraterrestrial, but I've seen, to quickly give you one weird one before I go into some of the more interesting stories. I was literally sitting in my room, and I had the thought that I wanted to go out and make a contact, try and do a C5, walked downstairs, went out of my kitchen, opened the door to my back garden, and the moment I looked up, a gigantic comet, like it literally, I can only describe it as a comet, but I swear to God, this is not a comet. It was huge, and it was orange and yellow and red and white sparks were flying off it. It was like a gigantic cosmic firework. It flew across the sky in complete alignment with me as I was walking out, like really high up in the sky. But, that was a bizarre event. But in terms of seriously life-changing things, stuff that really catalyzed me making Project Unity, I've had 4 contacts with orange orbs of light. And actually, funnily enough, one person I was speaking to was Desta Barnaby, Grant Cameron's assistant, because she's had similar experiences with orange orbs of light. But this was about, I would say, it was August 2019. I think it was like around the 20th. I can't remember exactly. I do have it written down somewhere, but it was August 2019 that the first contact happened with these orange orbs. Essentially what happened was I was looking up at the stars. I was outside in my garden, and the first thing I saw, it was a crystal clear night. The first thing I saw, after about 5 minutes of staring up and clearing my mind a little bit and essentially resonating thoughts outwards that I wanted to see something, which I can explain maybe a little bit more detailed later on, but in terms of how I do it. But it's not very complex my way. It's quite basic, not like Stephen Greer, which is quite a complex ceremony. I do it very basic. But, essentially I was staring up at the sky, and I was thinking my thoughts, and I saw a really bright white flash. Now, I've seen bright white flashes in dark areas of space before, and I've seen them repeat maybe once or twice. And I've also seen white orbs of light coming over, flashing repeatedly, not just once like an iridium flare, but repeatedly and glowing, and what people call power-ups. And it seemed to be in response to my thought process when I was going, oh my gosh, thank you for being here, another bright flash. Or if I was thinking something that seemed to be, in alignment with what I believe you need to be thinking for these types of contacts to happen, there was another bright flash. So to quickly segue, I just wanted to say that it does seem like they're trying to teach you even very rudimentarily. I don't think that's a word, but anyway, they're trying to teach you very simply, trying to teach you very simply, basically, that you're thinking the right way by giving you like a little flash of light. That's just my opinion. But essentially, I saw a bright white flash of light up in the sky. I looked up, and then it happened again. And then it happened again, and it was happening every 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds. There was a white flash in a completely dark area of the sky, and it wasn't moving. It was stationary, but when it turned off, I couldn't see an object. So it was, just this flash bulb appearing. And that was happening sequentially for about, maybe, I don't know, about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. And then it started moving. And again, I couldn't see an object once the light stopped, but it was flashing. And every time it flashed, it was slightly further down from where it was before. And it kept going, flash, flash, and it was moving down through the sky. And, this could be coincidence, but just from perspective, it actually stopped in alignment with two stars to create an equilateral triangle from my perspective. So I don't know if that's relevant, but it did.
But this wasn't a star, obviously, because
this was not a star, no.
Right.
But it stopped next to two, what I can only assume are stars, but now I question the things floating in the sky. It stopped next to these two stars and it formed like a triangle, and it just kept flashing. And this happened for, quite a while. I'd say over 5 minutes. I was staring at this, just going, oh my gosh, like, that's incredible. Like, that's definitely something. I don't know what it is, but that's definitely something. And, in my mind, I think I out loud as well, because my neighbors were asleep. I said, thank you, and said, thank you for being here. I turned my head to the left, and to back up a little bit, I was standing at the back of my garden, and I was looking towards my house and up at the sky. So on the right-hand side of the sky, this flashing light had appeared. It had done its movements, and I was watching that. I then turned my head to the left, and I saw a dark cloud moving, like not gigantic cloud. I'd say perspective-wise, maybe it's going to be a weird comparison, but like the size of a few lorries or something. It wasn't like a huge cloud, and it was drifting pretty high up across the sky. And I did a double take. I looked up at this cloud, I looked down, and something made me look straight back up at it. I looked up at it, and I literally was talking to Andy from that UFO podcast about this the other day, and I've tried to think of a better way to describe it, and I still can't. The only way I could describe it is this cloud, which was quite dark, almost stormy, but it was staticky or fizzy. That's the only way I can describe it. Almost like highly charged. I'd never seen anything like that before. The moment I locked my eyes back onto it, I just saw that it was like shimmering and staticky, and all these little particles popping off of it. Not super intense like TV static, not like that, but very visibly charged or moving and shimmering. And I was just staring at it. And so this was happening on the left-hand side of the sky as I was at the back of my garden looking kind of towards where my house is. And like I said, this other thing had been happening on the right. I look over to the left, this cloud is drifting over. The cloud's drifting over. I kid you not, as it got to my house, as it got to in alignment with my house, this cloud did a complete right angle turn, which scared the hell out of me. It did a complete right angle turn the moment it was, and this.
I have to say I've never seen a cloud do a right angle turn in my life.
Yeah, no.
And you were saying that this was a fairly small cloud. Did I hear that?
Yeah,
right?
It wasn't huge. It wasn't gigantic. It was like a couple of trucks or something. I don't know why that's the comparison I bring up, but it was staticky as well, Richard. This is the thing. It's really hard to describe, but it was, if you look at a normal cloud, you see it wispy and, floating around a bit. But this was like, all of it was little particles of like moving around, like it was agitated. And yeah, it literally, as it was drifting across like a normal cloud, just drifting at a normal pace, it got in alignment with my house and it did a right angle turn and it started coming up in alignment with the path until it was eventually going to be over my head. And I was freaked out. My heart skipped a beat. This cloud.
And you had just been doing your own CE5 protocols.
I'd just been doing some thought processes and some breathing, and then I got the flash response first of all from that light on the right hand side, and then I saw this cloud. But this is the.
Is that how it ended, or is
no? My goodness, no, Richard. This is the crescendo. Wow. Essentially, this cloud came over, and as it directly came above my head, and people will not believe it. Some people won't. I swear on my mother's life, I've got no reason to lie about this. The cloud dissipated in an instant. It just faded away, and inside it was about 25 to 30 orange orbs flying in a completely equilateral triangle formation, silently over the sky. Some of them I could see were weaving in between each other as it was moving. I swear to God, this happened to me.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
That's the first time I saw them.
Wow.
So been 3 others.
I want to stay with this one.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And just unpack it a little bit. So there's that's an extraordinary visual sighting. Like, as you were telling the story, I kept thinking, well, so what really appears to be happening is when you are engaging in your contact protocols, that you were experiencing, I mean, highly unusual visual sightings of aerial phenomena that really didn't make any sense and that, you hadn't seen in any other context. So I got
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Now, as we get to the culmination of this event, that's extraordinary. And
yeah,
everything else, like, one might be able to brush it aside as some kind of bizarre natural phenomenon, but I can't see a way to brush aside that last element, the triangle and the orbs and the maneuvering. Yeah, it's quite remarkable. Do you ever get any messages?
no.
You intuit? You don't.
Well, I
I think
mean,
that seems to
well,
be the
I
norm.
should
I
correct
don't.
that. I should correct that in some format.
Right.
I sometimes just base, and I don't know if this is entirely, something ET related or just because of my learning progress, but I've recently found that I can talk about things and I realize I'm not really even thinking about it. I'm just pouring out a lot of information at once, and afterwards I can barely even remember what it was. But it seemed to have a profound effect on who I was speaking to. So, I'm not trying to big myself up or anything, but that has been something I've noticed recently. So I don't know, maybe I got an intuition boost or something. But there have been 3 other ones. There was a closer contact, Richard.
Okay. Well, let's have it. Let's get into it. What is your close? This is the closest contact that you've
Yeah,
had?
closest. So real quick as well, and I don't know for sure because I've heard other things. I've heard some advice from someone who's got a medical background who says that potentially it could be due to a vaccination that uses a 3-pronged needle. This is probably sounding quite weird, but the reason I say that is because the first time I had this contact, this triangle that came out of the cloud, the day after, literally the morning after, I'm coming out of the shower, and I've got photos of this. I've got photos on my channel. It's still on my hand, on my forearm. There's I looked down immediately as I was drying myself off, and I saw it straight away. There was 3 exact, what people call scoop marks, because I've looked it up, and there's this weird layer of skin that almost looks like it's scarred and has been lifted up. Yeah. I have 3 of those in a triangle formation on my left forearm, and they're still there. This was August 2019. They're still on my forearm now.
They were not there previous.
They were not there previously. There was no itching, there was no scab, no pain, there was no discomfort. They just appeared. There was literally no healing process took place. They're just there. They're just 3 dots on my forearm, and I've had that. And as far as I'm aware, I had that the morning after I woke up from this contact that happened the night before, and like I said, they haven't faded. So that's interesting.
Okay, so I'm sure you've asked yourself the same question that everyone listening is asking. Do you think that you had an experience?
I don't know. I would say I'm not sure if I've had missing time because I wouldn't know if I've had missing time.
Sleeping.
Would I? But when I was sleeping, perhaps I don't know. I've thought about it. I've had someone tell me that triangular marks can appear if you've had a BCG vaccination. I think it's a BCG vaccination. They can actually appear later on in life from when you had it, and they can appear sometimes for no reason whatsoever and just fade into existence. But they usually come with symptoms, with some form of discomfort, and there was none. So the person who I spoke to said they're on the fence. It's weird. It is weird.
I see.
But what I'll do is I'll just quickly go over this very, very intense contact that I had, because like I said, I've had 4 contacts with orange orbs. The other 2 were very similar to the triangle formation. There was no cloud, but each time they've come, weirdly enough, from the left-hand side of my sky. I don't know if that's a pattern, but every time they've come from the left-hand side, when I've seen all sorts of things from all sorts of angles, but always from the left.
So you and I have, before we started this interview, I think we kind of laid out our plan of talking about your CE5 experience and also getting into the whole element of the current news going on in the UFO world, particularly in terms of the media coverage of the UFO phenomenon, New York Times piece. I guess I'm segueing here to Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal's recent piece in the New York Times. Obviously, they've done a few of them over the last few years. Can I ask you, if you don't mind shifting gears a little bit so we can talk about that?
Yeah, no problem.
Because you've actually really gotten involved in this, and you've people may not be fully aware, but you have your own behind-the-scenes knowledge and interest in this story. And I'm not sure how much of it you're prepared or able to talk about. But can we just jump right into this? So
Yeah.
I'd like to do maybe first of all, could we do a quick breakdown of the New York Times article itself? This is by Leslie and Ralph from, I guess, late July now, where they came out with a very long-awaited piece. Actually, the rumor mill in the UFO field was going fast and furious on this. Can you talk a little bit about that article and maybe give your initial reaction to it?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I've said this a few times on my channel, so for some of my subscribers, I probably sound like a broken record, so I'm sorry about that. But but I think these articles, although not as detailed or as specific as some of us had hoped them to be, still have a huge level of action potential behind them, and we have now, within the mainstream media, started covering entirely new ground, and that would be the topic of crash retrievals. Of course, most of us in the community have been aware for a long time now that crash retrievals are likely reality, but we should not forget just how little information within the UFO community directly transfers out and gets integrated into social norms. It rarely ever occurs. And so we need to recognize that having a topic such as crash retrievals discussed by mainstream media is representative of a major sea change in the entrenched status quo regarding the UFO issue. And this is bound to maintain course, in my opinion. We're looking at the progressive unraveling of a very long ball of string, basically. And I don't know when or, if we will ever unravel the whole thing, but I think it's pretty obvious that we're starting to take some momentous steps in that general direction. The New York Times articles and other such publications, they're a big part of what has caused this kinetic energy within the mainstream political and public sectors. So, it can only go forward from here, in my opinion. I think that they brought together some really interesting things.
Well, I guess I agree with you. When that piece first came out, there had been such a buildup among the UFO community researchers and just people following the subject that there was this idea, like, are they going to... there's a lot of speculation where they're going to actually do an expose in the treatment of the Admiral Wilson notes that are, I have argued, very straightforward, that were written by Dr. Eric Davis back in 2002. He has not taken a full position on that, of course, but that's understandable. When would they do that? And of course, there was reason to think that they would when the attorney Michael Hall kind of surreptitiously, I don't know how that happened actually, but he did out some of Ralph Blumenthal's interest in that during an interview that they were having, and the word got out. And so really, you couldn't put that genie back in the bottle. So we were all wondering, is this going to be a Wilson thing? And then we hear in the rumor mill that, well, the direction was shifting toward just crash retrievals in general. Yeah. And when I heard that, I thought, fabulous. Like, I would love to see, because I really have always believed in Leslie and Ralph. I think that they are genuinely committed to doing good work in this field within a very constrained environment that is the New York Times. I've always been curious how that whole thing works out. But to your point that this actually is important, I have to agree with you. The UFO community is in such a bubble, and we really so frequently forget just how little the rest of the world really genuinely knows. So when you get the ultimate voice of the establishment, which is the New York Times, really essentially giving people permission to believe in UFOs, it's really what they kind of did, and then to believe that they're very well, they didn't make it definitive, right? But they really put it out there, have probably been retrievals of these objects. That is absolutely spectacular. And so, yes,
you've made a good point there. You've made a good point there that they've almost given people, alongside other things such as To the Stars Academy, the changes by the Navy and the Pentagon.
With whom they're working very closely.
With whom they are working with very closely, exactly. But they've essentially given people permission to be interested in this, and people want to be given permission to be interested in this. It's just, I feel for a lot of people, it's been relegated to, this it's been ostracized and put to the side of the fringes. But, look at the fact that Scientific America, like Christopher Mellon recently mentioned on CNN.
Right.
Sorry, I was just clearing my throat there. Like he recently mentioned on CNN the fact that Scientific America was doing this, was doing an article on the fact that this now needs to be taken seriously and given scientific study. And so, these things are pushing it forward. It's giving people permission to be interested. And, the UFO community, again, I've said this, is oversaturated with data. And we sometimes forget just how much the information gap is, how big the gap is between us and the rest of the mainstream. So, yeah, crash retrievals, in my opinion, it's a flag in the ground. It's a new area of discussion. And the Admiral Wilson leaks, like you were saying, some of us, believed it was going to be something involved in this article. I would have no doubt whatsoever, just my opinion. I'm not speaking for Leslie or Ralph, but I would have no doubt whatsoever that is absolutely part of an ongoing investigation. I mean, you mentioned the fact that Michael Hall had this live stream. I was lucky enough to be in that live stream. I jumped into that live stream because I've got him on Facebook and it popped up as a notification. I don't normally, I don't normally click on the notifications because I'm rarely on Facebook, but I was just checking it. And it came up that he was doing a live stream. I clicked on it and he was just waiting to get on the phone with Ralph. So, I knew about it then. And obviously their interest was around the Admiral Wilson documents. But also I think something to highlight just from my perspective is the Admiral Wilson documents and their relationship with that in regards to my content, because me and Mr. X, and really it's Mr. X that should be given most of the credit because he was the one that put together such an encyclopedic background of knowledge on the documents. That's but right. We did this breakdown, and obviously you did your 5-hour speak with Mr. X as well. And these things, especially the breakdown at that time, was an issue for them. Not an issue where they came at me and made me feel uncomfortable.
Wait, stop right there. I mean, I just want to make sure that people understand. It was before I did the 5-hour thing with Mr. X, which, by the way, I only wanted to do 1 hour and then that turned into 5.
It's almost impossible with him. He's such a great speaker. He could just go and go.
His monumental research skills. But you did a 3-hour, which when that came out, we all thought, my God, that's just an incredible breakdown. And so that was the interview you're saying that got their attention.
Well, yeah. So let me reverse back a little bit, maybe, because my interest in the Admiral Wilson leaks, funnily enough, have led to me being in communication with yourself as well, and have led to me being in communication with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And eventually it culminated in me getting this interview. So if I can just give the background for some people, I got involved in the Admiral Wilson leaks, and Richard, most of this already. I got involved when I decided I was going to make some form of production surrounding the Wilson leaks, or the EWD notes, as they're sometimes called. I wanted to do this for a few reasons. One reason was that many of the people involved, people such as Dr. Greer, Commander Miller, Edgar Mitchell, Davis Putoff, etc., all of these people I'd already heard of through various channels of research, from SRI, remote viewing, and the ATIP 38 studies list. That included Earth Tech International as one of their contractors, and also unacknowledged. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's all of these different points, and these were things I was researching before I knew about the Admiral Wilson leaks. I'd heard these bits and pieces of the backstory from talks by Edgar Mitchell and Greer, but at the time when I first listened to them, I hadn't seen the notes. So when I did see the notes, around about the same time that you released your fantastic analysis and started making the rounds regarding the Wilson documents, around this time I got hold of the notes. I read them and recognized all of the names, and then the different talks by Greer and Edgar Mitchell came back to me, and I realized they were talking about this exact scenario that is detailed within the Wilson documents that they're all mentioned in. And so I wanted to make some type of production about this, because I have some editing skills. I enjoy doing that kind of thing, and it was a fascinating topic. So I put together some of the previously mentioned talks by Greer and Edgar Mitchell alongside some other things, and I basically made a trailer or a promo. And this was my initial proposal to my subscribers and other viewers, that I was planning to create something regarding the leaks. It wasn't really much more than that at the time, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it. But not long after that aired, I got contacted by, I think, James Rigney at first. I kind of forget the exact steps of this, but it ended in me being in contact with yourself, Grant Cameron, James Rigney, Michael Hall, and also Mr. X and some others. And so communications, that I'd begun with an apparent member. There was also, communications that had started with apparently a member of the U.S. intelligence services. Now, this is someone that I've been, communicating with for some time prior to us getting in touch. And I remember my primary reason for wanting to get hold of you at the time was due to this individual claiming they could provide additional currently unknown information regarding the Wilson leaks, and specifically, regarding the gatekeepers. As it stands, the information provided by that individual, including names, is still in the process of being, verified. Until then, you can't say with 100% certainty that we have anything, especially the name of a gatekeeper. But we might.
But this,
and we need to say where
is
it goes.
It fair to say this individual gave you names of the gatekeepers?
Yeah.
And the gatekeepers, just for anyone who, isn't totally familiar with what's in the Eric Davis notes on Thomas Wilson. Wilson, according to what the notes indicate, he told Davis that back in '97 when he was trying to find there were actually, he found several deep black budget programs that seemed to be connected with ET technology programs, but he found one and he met with them. He called them the gatekeepers. They were the three individuals. It was the program manager, the security officer, and the corporate attorney.
That's the one.
And they were the ones who essentially denied him access to the program. They told him a little bit, basically, my sense was to shut him up. And because he was becoming a nuisance, they had to give him something. And then essentially said, that's all you're getting, get the hell out.
Exactly.
So your source gave you those names.
Yeah, and we spoke about that, and it's been a back and forth, and there's still a lot of background investigation into whether or not these are accurate details or not. But this is what started my interest. I've since been fortunate enough to become privy to sensitive details, some of which have now come to pass, such as the release of the latest New York Times article and my interview, some of which have also not come to pass. But it was my working with Mr. X, and a man, like I said, who really deserves the majority of the credit for the 3-hour analysis of the Wilson documents that's on my channel. I mean, that man has an encyclopedic knowledge of the topic, and he provided key names and details which I would never have been able to find. He knew so much that when we compiled his research into a relatively digestible format via the breakdown analysis video, that Mr. X and I were subsequently contacted by Leslie Kean, and Ralph Blumenthal. And as I've discussed a few times on the channel, they politely asked if I'd be willing to take the video down for a short period of time in order for them to pursue this story without essentially firing out warning shots to other media platforms, and perhaps even to some of the people mentioned in the video who may have been spooked by having themselves attached to the scenario. So, after some discussion with Mr. X, and I know you and him spoke about it also, Richard, I agreed to take the video down in order to assist their efforts.
I'll just say, because it just fed, of course, this massive thought of, oh my God, the government's come down and they've taken Jay's video down. But yes, like you, I know who Mr. X is, and I have a tremendous regard for him. And he
Absolutely.
contacted me and asked. He just asked my opinion about this request, and what did he think was my opinion? What did I think my opinion on was? And it was really tough, because there's a part of me that just said, they want you to take it down. The hell with them. This is work.
Of course.
You and Jay did this, and it should be up there. I mean, you're just doing them a favor, really. But on the other hand, we really did think about it, and we thought, well, if their motives are really good, and they're doing this with the best of intentions, they want to have some, I guess, a sense of quiet. They don't want to scoop. They don't want to be scooped, I guess. I guess we thought, well, if they're really going to do a good job of this, I think I suggested, give them a month. And I said, if they don't have this done in a month, then put the damn thing back up.
Yeah,
I think it's what I said. I don't actually know if that's what you did. I don't know how long.
Well, I took it down for 30 days, and the thing is, because I was obviously mulling it over a lot myself, and right. I thought about it, and honestly, I just came to the conclusion that Project Unity is like a drop in the ocean in comparison to the MYT in regards to influence and their ability to get a story out. But
if their work would be good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. Yeah, but my prerequisite. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh, well, I'm bouncing around here. There's a lot of debate. I would even say like rancorous, acrimonious debate in the UFO community about the nature of the New York Times piece anyway, and like what Leslie and Ralph were trying to do. And connected to that, of course, the ever explosive topic of TTSA in general. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any common ground between two extremes of opinion. Maybe I'm wrong here, but there's definitely a very significant and vocal group of researchers. Many of them I have a lot of respect for them, and I like them personally, but I don't agree with them here, where they really look at TTSA and the New York Times piece as a kind of, I don't want to say as an op, as a dark op. I mean, there are interpretations that really see these guys as I mean, I think I've heard Stephen Greer even hint at this. Like, it's a false flag. It's propaganda designed to whip up fear and support for the national security community, to play the card that ETs are a threat. You hear this all the time. So there's that whole part of it. And then there's just a whole part of it as so many members of TTSA obviously have, I mean, well-documented and sometimes high-level background in the intelligence community or the Defense Department. And so the reasoning there is that they should not be trusted.
Right.
And I wondered, like, do you have a reaction to those thoughts?
I do.
And what do you think about, and of course, you know, because with TTSA, you can't separate them from the New York Times piece, because it's very obvious that folks like Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo, they've had very, very strong relationship with the New York Times journalist. So what do you think about all of it?
You know, I've spoken again about this a few times on my channel, because this is something that people ask, and like you said, there's sometimes two very distinct camps. You know, especially in the UFO community with what's happening at the moment, you've almost got TTSA, and then you've got you know, like CSETI or something along those lines, where it's you know, totally at odds with each other in terms of how they interact. Right. I mean, you know, TTSA itself.
That's one definite element of it, but I think there's a lot of elements of this acrimony. But go on, please.
Oh no, absolutely. There's lots of different elements to this, but you know, I think it's, sorry, I've just gone off. I've just been knocked off keel a little bit there. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Well, I guess.
Sorry.
Do you think TTSA is an op? First of all, do you think that they're out to create disinfo?
No, I don't.
Is there a behind the scenes motivation that you determine and that type of thing?
Yeah. So I don't think that they are. I think that when you need to get congressional attention on this issue, I think that when you're trying to convince lawmakers and influencers and people within the Department of Defense and scientists, you can't. You know, I have my own perspective. I think that there is a very big consciousness aspect to this. And I think there's a very you know, metaphysical component to this, that there is some form of perhaps even an awakening, you know, taking place on this planet. I don't know how far I would go, because there are a lot of people that, you know, that say, you know, in 10 years we're going to have an entire utopia, and like, you know, I try and be a realist, but at the same time,
I'm not one of those people.
Well, I genuinely try and believe that we're capable of doing something like that, and I see that we're in a time where these things could maybe take place if we head in the right direction. But I think that when it comes to these guys, right, when it comes to like TTSA, the New York Times, I think they're speaking the language of the system. They're speaking the language of the bureaucracy. How do you go into the Department of Defense or, you know, the NSA or somewhere, and you go, look, you know, there's these extremely advanced beings, more advanced than anything that we've, you know, that we're capable of doing, and they seem to be trying to precipitate some form of awakening, some form of spirit. You know, you'd be kicked straight out of the office. So you have to go in there. You talk incursions, you talk threats.
Well, you know, some of those intel guys are totally on board with the consciousness element.
Oh, some of them, yeah. But I mean, I meant the overarching kind of structure, the bureaucratic superstructure. It's not ready for that, and they don't understand it, and so you have to. I think, at least my sincere hope with TTSA is that it's a long process that they see needing to happen, where you first of all you address it with the language of the world, because the world is very threat, aerospace, you know, like, you know, our militaries, our governments, that's the state of consciousness we're in, and so you kind of have to address it at that point, and I think maybe they understand that, and so my sincere hope is that they're addressing the threats, they're addressing the incursions, they're talking about it in a specific language so that you can get senators and lawmakers to dislodge, you know, stovepiped information, because they suddenly go, oh my gosh, it's a threat. No, we need to know now. This is no longer a joke. This is no longer tinfoil hat woo-woo stuff. Like, you know, that's how they'd call it, because they're the way they are. You know, this is no longer like that. We need to take serious action. So, you know, you speak their language and they start responding. After the fact, you can then start maybe addressing the concepts of, oh, well, actually, you know, they're not maybe here to destroy us, or they can't, or we can't even defend ourselves against them if we could. Yeah. You know, maybe these things need to be opened up later down the line.
I'll just add, I agree with everything that you're saying here. I had a conversation with one of the members of TTSA about this whole emphasis on threat. And I think at some point I just said something like, so what's the deal? Why are you doing this? And the response was, he said, look, we're dealing with a brain dead political system. We're dealing with a completely uninterested major media system that doesn't give a crap about any of this. A public that's just totally like out to lunch on this, and he said, "How are you going to get their attention?" Like it's like
Yeah.
trying to shake the shoulders of the political establishment, and the only thing really that's likely to work is say this is a potential threat. And I'll
Yeah.
simply add that when I wrote my first 2 volumes of history of UFOs in a national security state, I have to say, like, my approach was not radically different from what theirs is. And that is, I elected to focus on the military components of the UFO phenomenon, not because I thought that that was the only important element of it. I never thought that was. But the fact that if you've got a national security apparatus that is engaging in these objects, and they were and they do on a regular basis because of airspace violations and all of these other things that go on, and yet they deny that there's anything to this phenomenon, that to me is a massive discrepancy. And to me, I always saw that as a wedge through which you could maybe pry open the secrecy a bit. It's like, this is of national security importance, and you've proven it through the documents that are declassified. We know that you're concerned, so stop lying to us. And it seems to me that I get a lot of that with TTSA statements. When you hear Elizondo on the TV show Unidentified saying this is a potential threat, like, that's what I hear. I'm not really hearing a pitch to increase the military budget to fight ETs. Like, I'm not getting that at all. And yet I hear people saying that all the time, it seems. And I don't know. I'm
People jump to
naive here,
conclusions.
I think what they're doing is say that again.
People jump to conclusions. You know, it's not just unique to the UFO community, I suppose, but we've got people in the community who do jump to conclusions.
Yeah. The other thing, though, like, I mean, I've never believed that TTSA is totally forthcoming. I think that they hold a huge amount of information back. Oh, yeah. But it's right. It's not that they're engaging in a wholesale deception, at least not in my opinion. I think they're, as you were indicating, they're trying to play it smart and knowing, like, if we go too far, we're toast. Like, this is one reason why they will absolutely not own the Wilson document, even though everyone in that organization knows that document is genuine. Like, they're
not gatekeepers. But, they're not gatekeepers. They're on some form of a leash, I would imagine. By a higher up power.
The one thing that I would say that I have a concern about, and this is not something like I consider their fault or even Leslie and Ralph's fault. And by the way, I want to talk about your interview with Leslie and Ralph in a minute. But I wonder what I'm saying this, and I want to know your reaction. Are we? I mean, we've moved into somewhat of a new level of openness because of the efforts of TTSA and the New York Times and other mainstream. I mean, there's Tucker Carlson over at Fox, and there's even Joe Rogan. I mean, all of these people have been instrumental in opening the door to a public conversation, it seems to me. So is that happening? Or I want to know your thoughts on this possibility. Are we just seeing someone moving the goalposts back a little bit for a new version of the UFO cover-up? In other words, what about this as the new cover-up? New cover-up being, yeah, we've acknowledged that UAP are real, the UFOs are real, and we're not making them. And B, we may have recovered some artifacts that we cannot understand. And just, I wonder if that position, if that were to consolidate and all new revelations were to stop from that point, wouldn't we be in just a new version of the cover-up? Have you wondered about that?
I don't know if it would go down that well.
Because it would be a version of the cover-up. There's no bodies. There's no intact flying saucer that we have. You know what I mean? It would be like, yeah, we know there's a little bit going on, but we still don't have a lot of information, thereby preserving the entire rest of the structure of secrecy from deep investigation. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we'll ever dislodge all of it. I think maybe there's a certain time where you just have to start moving forward with new data and trying to integrate new understandings. Right. But in terms of disclosure, I mean, I think it wouldn't go down well now. I mean, we've never seen, even though it's actually quite lacking in Europe regarding mainstream media attention, we've never seen this level of interest in the mainstream media. I don't expect it to go away. And I think that there's a lot of other things happening as well. In my opinion, at least, we're at a fundamentally important period of time in the human story. All right, we've experienced oppression and inequality, wars and horrific acts for thousands of years. Many would argue that this is evidence that we'll never change our ways, that we're destined to an existence of violence and greed. But I disagree. Right, I see everything, all of these things that are happening, good and bad, they're growing pains of humanity. All of the disparity, all the errors in thinking, all of it will, I believe, hopefully create an eventual awakening into a different state of being. And this will echo down through, society. It's kind of like having a life lesson. You make mistakes at an interpersonal level. If we can, take it down, you make mistakes, but we grow from them, hopefully, if you consciously integrate what you shouldn't have done and you move forward. And so as a planet, I think we're doing that. And we still have a long way to go overall, and especially in respects to the UFO subject. And although the recent changes, the Navy and Pentagon recognition and the Senate Intelligence Committee talk of crash retrievals, all of this is incredible. But we all know that we have a long way to go until we can claim we're truly in a post-disclosure world. But I think, honestly, I think the forefront of study will be the exotic physics and the connection it seems to hold in relation to consciousness. I do think that's very integral. And we have a long way to go in many areas, not just in relation to UFO transparency. However, one of the reasons why this time, in my opinion, is different to all of the thousands of years of the same old is that we now have the ability to communicate and transfer information on a global scale instantaneously. This is a game changer. We now have a totally new and revolutionary way of learning and communicating, and we are no longer reliant on the stagnant and propaganda-driven channels of entertainment, education that have been given to us by the current structure. So the internet, has provided us with a backdoor to global information. And so it's far less easy to lie to the masses to convince us of something that's not true, because now we have independent researchers such as yourself, who will, and myself and many others, who will reveal the BS and circulate the evidence online. This is truly, in my opinion, this is a time of great change. We're learning faster than ever, but we must not let our technological and egoic pursuits remain so far ahead of our philosophy or spirituality.
Well, I guess I'll just say I appreciate your perspective on this, and it gives me a little bit of hope. But I might have held that position more strongly maybe a decade ago, when it seemed to me that the web really still was an engine for expansion of information and consciousness. I have my doubts about that now, but maybe we can continue that conversation.
You've helped expand my consciousness, and you utilize the internet, Richard. You yourself have helped expand consciousness around the world, and people all over the world almost every day are saying thank you to you. So there's people we can use it as a tool, but it has been misused en masse.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that point. And I guess all I'm seeing is a reaction.
Yeah.
Within the world of the web, Google, Facebook, YouTube, all of that. A real restriction, increasingly, what's being allowed even to be said. But I want to ask you about, by the way, your other points, I really did like hearing them, so I'm glad that you said them. Can we do a quick little assessment of your interview with Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal? I mean, it was one of the most important interviews in the UFO field, maybe of the year, was what you did with Leslie and Ralph. And I encourage people to go to the Project Unity channel and to listen to that interview. I think, Jay, you handled these two very experienced journalists just beautifully, if I may say.
Thank you.
Your preparation going into the interview was quite evident. And you also really demonstrated a great ability on the fly to just jump in when needed with some fresh questions. So what was your overall, well, can we ask how the interview even got to happen? How did that happen? How were you able to score that?
Well, one thing I was going to say before is literally with the Admiral Wilson breakdown video, and as we were saying, you and Mr. X discussed the possibility of me taking it down, and I discussed the possibility of me taking down that video. I agreed to take down the video. The prerequisite to me doing so was to have the interview. So that's how I got it. I got the interview because I said to them, I said, I'll take it down as long as you give me the first interview. And they agreed to that because they were probably expecting me to say, give me money. And I didn't care about that. I just wanted to help, get my platform out there a bit more. That was more important to me. And so I just said, can I get the interview? And they were quick to agree, and they honored it.
You deserved it for that reason. And that was a smart move on your part. So,
thank you.
congratulations. So yeah, not long after, actually they did not one article, they did two pieces, we should just say. The second piece, kind of an op-ed type piece, essentially saying, it's believing in UFOs really isn't the question anymore. We know that they are real. And that was a bit of a coy article, if I may say. Like it was smart, but very coy in the sense of saying, on the one hand, they were adamant, like UFOs does not necessarily equal alien. Like they were quite adamant about that. And then in the next breath, they're saying, yeah, but they're also not Russian and Chinese.
Yeah, it can't be Russian or Chinese. Yeah, I know.
So you're thinking, okay, well, these are the exact questions that American analysts were actually asking back in the 40s. And the only other question really to ask is it something that we are making, that is the U.S. covertly? And there's really not a whole lot of support for that, frankly, either, when you really get into it. So they handle it really well, and I think they let the reader form the obvious conclusion, which is that this certainly seems real. But anyway, go on and let's talk about your interview with them and what was your assessment of that?
Well, look, I was tremendously happy with the outcome of the interview, building up to it. I was unsure how it would be received in general by the community, but I was totally overwhelmed by the level of positive responses, and I really feel that I represented the community well and did us proud, which is an awesome thing for me, and I'm just really grateful, to be honest, that I got the opportunity to do that. And I think they handled themselves really well, although I'm sure they would have loved to expand upon certain details that didn't make it to print. I understand from a journalistic perspective why they couldn't do so, but I think they gave some good answers, dodged a couple answers, as is to be expected sometimes with seasoned reporters. But overall, I think it was educational for the community, especially in regards to the overall process that was involved in kind of getting the story into the Times.
They were definitely doing a finesse throughout the interview, and it's something like, you hear it. I respected where they were coming from, because obviously they were in a spot there. On the one hand, I think they were both well aware that when the article came out, like within the UFO community, it really did come through as a letdown. It was like all the wind just got taken out. It's like this. Essentially, even the headline was like, well, there will be an announcement of UFO information to come out in the future. Like, what? We knew about the Senate bill already. That was a month ago. Danny Silva scooped you on that, by the way, guys. So another of the young guns. I thought, this is it. But then actually there was one, to my view, really one significant data point. And that, of course, was the fact that Dr. Eric Davis had given briefings on Capitol Hill and at the Pentagon on the matter of crash retrievals. And by the way, the language that they use in the article, I think it was artifacts not of this earth.
Not too dissimilar from the AWL leaks, is it? From the Admiral Wilson leaks.
Absolutely heartening. So that was the one big thing. But I guess I want to hear you say more about this. I just wanted to add, they were finessing this idea that, there was some disappointment. Yes, there's a lot of people wondering, were these guys muzzled? Really, were they muzzled? I think the piece was like 1,000 words, which really struck me as rather short. And were they prevented from releasing all of their data? And in the interview, you asked these types of questions, and in fact, you were quite persistent at times. And their attitude was no, yes and no. It was yes and no. It's like, well, obviously there was more that we had that we could get into the article. And I think the way they portrayed it was, there was more, but it wasn't a big deal because this is the New York Times and we had to be able to defend it. And I mean, to me, it struck me as kind of weak, to be honest.
Well, I think they're kind of cautious, they're probably a bit cautious, right? Undoubtedly someone in the MIT is going to hear that interview. They probably didn't want to throw anyone under the bus if there was anyone to throw under the bus. Exactly. I wouldn't have expected them to have ratted out an editor if someone had done something. I wouldn't have expected them to drop a name, but I had to push sometimes just to see if there was anything we could glean out of it.
There was one moment where I really would like to ask about this, and if I don't want to put anyone in an uncomfortable spot here, but you were talking, Leslie was speaking at one point, and I could almost hear her thinking as she said this, I shouldn't be saying this. And it was this statement to the effect that, well, I don't really think that our scientists have made much progress in the study of these artifacts, or very, very closely words to that effect.
Yeah.
And she finished her thought, and you followed up. And I'd love to hear how you characterize this.
Well, no, the moment she said that, I lit up like a light bulb, like, because it was in the middle of the conversation, and you know, she said that as part of another discussion, and so she
Right.
was, you know, continuing to speak on, and I was like, right, listen to everything she's saying, but you know, keep that in mind, because the moment she said it, I was like, okay, that sounds a bit like something from the Admiral Wilson documents, you know, because we
Yes,
know
absolutely.
that, you know, within the Admiral Wilson documents, they say that it was a painstaking process. They've had very little success. It's been a very long process, you know, and they haven't had, you know, a lot of success with it. So that seemed indicative of to me of something from the Wilson documents.
And so you asked her about that.
And yeah, so I asked her about it, and you know, for those that have listened to it, her response, she kind of almost said that she wished she hadn't have said that, and you know, just
And
kind
that
of backpedaled
anymore.
a little bit and wouldn't say anymore.
Couldn't.
So
That she
yeah,
couldn't say.
so take from that what you will, people.
It was a bit of it was an awkward moment. It was, you know, I think there was definitely that recognition on her part that she shouldn't have said that.
I would imagine so.
I mean, to me, I took that as a, you know, I mean, I am in no position to speak for Leslie or Ralph, obviously, but I took that as a very implicit endorsement of that document, particularly because one of the main people that they interviewed for the piece was Dr. Eric Davis, who's the author of the notes. Like everyone knows, he's the author of the notes. And I will assume, not having spoken to Dr. Davis about this, but I will assume that he believes what he was told almost 20 years ago by Admiral Wilson, that progress has probably been quite slow. And then the fact that, you know, in the article itself, you've got this statement of not of this earth. That is absolutely a reference, in my view, to Davis's notes in the, you know, from his conversation with Admiral Wilson.
Absolutely.
You know, not by human hands, not made by man, not of this earth.
Yeah, not of this earth. It's not really very normal wording. I don't know if you know, what's your opinion on that? Because I just don't think that if you're going to write an article, you would say of this earth. It's just kind of jolty. It doesn't really flow very well. So it's strange wording unless you were hinting it was borrowed from a document.
I would say so. I mean, I think it's an elegant phrase, but it's not a phrase that one would hear every day.
No, not typically.
So yeah, I thought it was a bit of a kind of a back end way of getting the phrase into the conversation without referring to the Wilson notes specifically. So yeah, that was my take on it. What were some other reactions you had to Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean in this interview? Any other thoughts that came to your mind about the process that they went through? And I mean, they talked a lot about the process, actually.
Well, they did. They educated people on the process quite well, actually, and they went into a lot of detail regarding, you know, how it goes through the different channels in the Times, and you know, I mean,
multiple levels of approval. By the way, I think
multiple. Yeah, he said almost. I think he actually said almost an infinite amount of levels.
Infinitude.
Yeah, an infinitude of levels. So you know, it shows you that it does go through a very rigorous process, and perhaps Leslie and Ralph are not, you know, to blame if something was to be taken out. And you know, I don't know that for sure. I'm just saying that because of the process it goes through, because of the massive bureaucratic structure they're having to basically, you know, interact with to get this story out, maybe there are other interests. Maybe there are national security interests or bureaucratic interests that stop things from getting out.
Absolutely there are. I mean, this is my take on it, and I'd like to get your take. My take, honestly, is that you've got Leslie and Ralph, who are legit journalists, who are legitimately interested in this subject, and are actually genuinely doing their best to get this story out to the widest public. Like that, my take it. But they also realize they're working for the behemoth itself, the New York Times. The Gray Lady, as it's called, which has, you know, decades of back in the Cold War with the Mockingbird program, that is CIA infiltration of mainstream media. New York Times is one of the key you know, institutions working with the CIA to spin all kinds of news on behalf of the intelligence community. Do we think that that's just ended all of a sudden? Absolutely not. I mean, you've got this whole history of the New York Times through the whole weapons of mass destruction charade of 20 years ago, and countless times since of the New York Times working with national security interests over and
Exactly.
over again. And so I think the line that Ralph and Leslie were walking here was, I think they know full well like what they're dealing with here and the compromises that are necessary in order to get even this stripped down story out. So when Ralph talked about an infinitude of levels like that, I thought, yes, boom, exactly. Like how high do those levels go?
Yeah.
So everyone has got a piece of the editorial process, and so I think obviously they don't have full control over that article.
No.
Right?
Well, I did ask them. I did ask in the interview if they believe they've had any interference run against their story, and there was a bit of a pause before they went no. So I don't know. Like that's me maybe picking a little bits, but they wouldn't. I doubt they would be able to say, and they wouldn't want to say if there was some sort of issue that they felt was happening in that regard. I'm sure that that's the last thing they'd ever want to admit to, and so I wouldn't have really expected them to admit it, but. It's more kind of gauging psychological responses when you ask those kind of questions, just to see how they respond initially. And I get the idea that perhaps that's a possibility.
Yeah, I say these things because my take on this is, I mean, I'm very, very deeply skeptical of almost anything that comes out of the New York Times. To be perfectly candid, I've seen it as a real problem in many ways for a long, long time. And I have friends to this day who like love the New York Times, and I can't get that. I don't understand that. But what I see in this case is there's like a faction. I always describe it as a faction within the establishment, because there are always factions within the establishment, actually, always. And this is a faction that for whatever reasons and motivations they have, believe in promoting the UFO story. They believe in it. But it's not like you can just go into the New York Times and write anything you want. Like you cannot. And it's not just like if you're TTSA, you can walk into Capitol Hill and just say anything you want, or walk into the Pentagon. They have to navigate a very careful path. And that's been my take pretty much since the beginning on them.
One thing that is actually a subscriber of mine brought it up. I wish I could remember the name. I'll give you a shout out. But a subscriber brought this up, and it's a good point. We're all, including the journalists, we're all focused on Pentagon, Navy, DOD, DIA, Senate Intelligence Committee. What about NASA? Eyes in space. They should probably have some information if they've been monitoring our aerospace for such a long time, and there doesn't really seem to be any concerted effort in the mainstream to ask NASA questions. It seemed like that would be the first people they'd assume would know something, is let's go ask NASA, and it hasn't happened. And I sometimes get the feeling that the inner core of NASA is actually playing a very integral role in the secrecy.
Yes, I agree with that fully. I've had a couple of individuals with good connections high up, actually, that have said exactly that to me. That NASA's got there's the public and the classified elements of that organization. I mean, NASA's had classified elements to its mission since the very beginning, really, since like 1960 or 1959. So there's that. There's other organizations as well. There's the Department of Energy, the DOE, which often is overlooked. That the more that those of us diving into this look, the more the DOE seems critically important to the nature of the UFO secret.
Atomic
and that's simply
energy
because of the nuclear connection. Absolutely. And then another organization, you mentioned NASA and space, but I would also mention the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office.
Oh, yeah. No
organization
doubt.
which monitors all of the spy satellites that we've got, and undoubtedly much, much more having to do with space-based anomalous objects, and undoubtedly also the NSA, which officially is in charge of communications, encryption, and so forth. But I think there's probably very good reason to think the NSA is deep. So you've got like all of these different elements.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are talking about just a few. Mm-hmm. So there's a long way to go. Honestly, I appreciate your at least guarded hope, can we call it that, where we're moving in the future. When I brought up this idea of the goalposts being moved, I brought it up because I think that's my current conclusion at the time, which is that we may still well be in for a long period of continued cover-up that's just moved a little bit down the field. just a little bit. And I could be wrong. One of the insiders of the TTSA just described all these revelations as more toothpaste out of the tube. And it's true, like once it's out, it doesn't go back in, which you were sort of indicating. Like, the more that's out, could that develop more momentum? And I mean, we all know the answer is yes, it could develop more momentum. But the question is, how does more information come out? If there's no information about bodies, for example, that is going to be forthcoming. If there's no information about any significant technology, then where's it going to come from? And it could be stalled for 10, 15, 20, 30 years for all we know.
I don't think we should rely entirely on a already proven to be corrupt system to essentially usher forward a new era of truth. I mean, we as civilians, we as the people do have the power. Like, it's a saying, but it's true. And, no major revolution, no major events have taken place from the masses. It's a renegade group. It's a small group always that pushes for change, whether it's, civil rights act or women's vote. It's always a small group. And so I think that we have to sometimes recognize the power we have on the micro scale to affect the macro scale. And, there is an important element of this, which is a declassification and dissemination effort from our governments. But this is where I would side with Dr. Greer in some respects, where he talks about, this is an effort in regards to the consciousness interaction, because you're subverting the secrecy. These people who operate within this bureaucratic and overarching structure of secrecy, they can't engage in these practices. They literally cannot do that. And we can. And I think that, when you're looking at trying to change the world, you have to change perception. You have to change how people think about things. And how do you do that? If you consciousness, like if you can integrate a more developed understanding of your own awareness, then you can actually further this even more. So I would say that, as much as the government and the TTSA and the official disclosure is important, we ourselves need to find some way in which, as individuals, we can enact our own effort.
That's really well put. This might be a good moment to conclude this part of our conversation, but I'll just add, there's a brilliant and beautiful piece of writing from a little over a century ago by Leo Tolstoy, who's always been one of my favorite writers. After Tolstoy wrote his great works of fiction like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, he kind of went off and became this almost prophetic type of a person, almost like a hermit living off on his own. And he wrote a variety of moral or ethical and moralistic treatises. And one of them, one that really resonates with me, is titled "The Kingdom of God is Within You." And what Tolstoy, like, I think that you would resonate with this. He said, if you look around the world, you have all these nations that call themselves Christian nations, but he says there are no Christian nations on planet Earth, none. He said, because what is the core of Christianity, which is, he says it's not cosmology for him. For him, it was the Sermon on the Mount, this very, very difficult notion of turn the other cheek when violence is done to you, and love your enemy. Like that's such a hard thing for us to do, right? And what Tolstoy really said is, look, in the in the New Testament, where Christ says the kingdom of God is within you, he's like, what does that mean? He says, my take, this is what it means. It's like we have the ability to create true heaven on earth, each on our own, by implementing that philosophy and only that philosophy. If we decide to love, not hate, if we decide to repay violence with love or with understanding, if we decide as a society not to discipline and punish, in like, he really had a big thing to say about the punitive nature of Russian society of his time, because that's where he lived. Things like this, when there's so much injustice, so much inequality, where peasants would be thrown into prison because they poached on the land of some noble because they needed to get food, or where young men are impressed into the military and stripped of their humanity, as Tolstoy saw it. Like all these things, he said, we do this to ourselves, and all that we really need to do is look inward and to see that we can love, not hate. And I think, honestly, I mean, that doesn't seem too radically different from what you've been saying all along.
I would completely agree. I really resonate with that, and I actually just wrote something down just so I wouldn't forget it, because just real quickly, I think it's easy. It's easy to love when it's easy to love, but it's hard when it's hard to love. That is the most rewarding and most important time to be loving. It's everyone can be loving when you're supposed to be loving, but the real, I think, and I'm not a Christian, but I think that the resonance of what we call God, like the highest understanding of what you are as a person and as a being, that comes out through love. And so, the most challenging thing to do is to be loving in all moments, because life is insane, but it can be really rewarding to do that. And we should all strive for it. And that's what would change the world.
Yeah. Very well said, sir. So look, why don't we wrap this part up here? I'm going to hijack you for a short while to talk about some of your other CE5 experiences, if you don't mind, for
of course.
But for here, I think we've had a really great conversation. I'm so impressed by just your thought processes, Jay, and how you go through what you do, and your dedication and your passion. And I really hope that we have you for a long time to come.
Oh, thank you so much, Richard. That means a lot. That really means a lot.
And please, for listeners, go to Jay's channel. It's Project Unity right here on YouTube. I'll link to it below. And there's actually, I really like your channel too. You've got to set up like a big library in different sets.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. You've got like a whistleblower section, like a science section, and whole like a CE5 section, and much more.
Yeah, but a few different bits.
UFO history, and it's really good. So people should check it out.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Jay, that's all we've got. I really want to thank you again for your time here. And to the listeners, I want to thank you for being here with Jay of Project Unity for this really wonderful conversation. And that's it. And let's all remember, as we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Later.